Greetings to Freedom viewers. Today we will talk as usual about the situation at the front and, for example, about the captured Russian tankers of the Shadow Fleet. And of course, there will be much more. Here's a brief preview of what I'm going to talk about. Odesa, Dnipro, Kherson. The Russian army continues shelling Ukraine. There are dead and wounded, as well as destruction of civilian infrastructure.
Please, here it is. Fresh shot. It was necessary. This is the Shahed's number here, the 13th, 12th from 2025.
Cyprus supports strengthening sanctions against Russia, reinforcing Ukrainian air defense, and also EU expansion. Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with Nikos Christodoulides. They discussed Cyprus's plans during its presidency of the EU Council. In the near future, documents on security guarantees for Ukraine will be signed, Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated following the coalition meeting. Those interested are in Paris.
So today we are presenting various levels of security guarantees in which the United States of America has confirmed its participation, particularly in what we call monitoring.
Russian occupation forces launched a massive attack on Kryvyi Rih. According to preliminary reports, 3 people were injured. They were taken to the hospital in moderate condition. According to the head of the Kryvyi Rih Defense Council, Alexander Vilkul, the city may experience a serious emergency power outage while critical infrastructure is currently operating on generators. 2 people were killed and 8 more were injured. They were wounded as a result of a combined missile and drone strike by the Russian army on the port infrastructure of the Odesa region. This was reported by the head of the regional military administration, Ole Kiper. According to him, as a result of the Russian attack, an administrative building, cargo vehicles and containers were damaged. All relevant services are working on site to deal with the aftermath. 7 people, including 2 children, were injured in Dnipro. After a massive Russian drone attack, about 15 apartment buildings were damaged. Their windows were blown out. In one district, about 10 cars burned down. See how Dnipro survived that night in our correspondence report. Here,
There's a piece of a Shahed drone. It's fresh. This is the Shahed serial number. Here, the 13th, 12th from 2025.
After a difficult night, residents of a quiet residential district in Dnipro are dealing with the aftermath of the Russian attack by strike drones. Warnings about incoming Shahed started coming in yesterday at around 10:30 in the evening. Tatiana says she had already gone to bed by that time.
We woke up, it said there were 10 to 13 Shaheds, so we sat, waited and hid. And then there was a strong explosion, that's it, the windows were blown out, the glass shattered.
Tatiana's apartment is on the 8th floor. She says she doesn't have a single intact window left. In the morning, neighbors share with each other what they went through on the night of January 7th.
Both the balcony and the apartment have windows like this, all the glass is gone. The window frame, if I hadn't managed to move a minute earlier, the frame would have fallen on me. It was all like this on the floor. All the flowers, the soil, everything scattered. A mess.
The attack drone crashed in the courtyard between the 9-story buildings. Several cars immediately caught fire. A fire also broke out in an apartment on the 1st floor.
I am not smart. I'm still cold. I only heard the explosion. Once and then a second time.
Galina arrived at the site of the Russian strike in the morning to help her elderly relative. She is 80 years old, her husband is even older. The elderly couple's apartment, like those of their neighbors, was left without heating and electricity in the winter, and with the windows blown out.
3 windows were blown out. The kitchen, the living room and the bedroom. And she has an aunt who is 80 years old and her husband is 82, who is bedridden and disabled. And thank God, in that bedroom where he was lying, the window was covered with a warm blanket. And that's why the glass didn't fall on him.
The Russian Shahed drone attack near Dnipro lasted for an hour and a half. Fires broke out at 4 locations, 7 people were injured, including 2 children. An 8-year-old girl is suffering from stress and minor injuries. A 16-year-old girl required medical assistance. 15 apartment buildings in the city were damaged. About 2,000 windows were blown out in them.
Educational institutions in the city were also affected. This includes a vocational school, kindergartens, and also a lyceum.
Since this morning, more than 20 tons of glass debris have already been removed from the sites that were hit by the Russian attack. Utility workers and special equipment remain at the locations to continue working. Natalia Hus, Shesh Tangalov Academy from Dnipro, reporting for the TV channel.
2 people have died. Another person was injured as a result of the Russian army's attack on the Kherson region. According to the local prosecutor's office, in the morning the occupiers shelled Kherson with artillery. A man who was outside was killed there. In the afternoon, Russian troops in the Berislav district of the region dropped explosives from a drone onto a civilian car. The driver was killed. In the evening, the Russian army carried out another shelling of peaceful settlements in the region. A 46-year-old man was injured. More than 1,500 anti-shade drones per day. In December and January, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense reached this high level in supplying interceptors to Ukrainian troops. This made it possible to significantly increase the capabilities of units in countering aerial targets at various levels. From the front line to the protection of rear regions, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry noted. Interceptor drones are now a critically important element of multi-layered air defense. They make it possible to preserve expensive air defense missile resources by using cheaper means of destruction and prevent air defense systems from being overloaded. Since the beginning of today, 140 combat engagements have already been recorded on the front line. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. And Nabu, the largest number of Russian assaults is once again in the Pokrovsk direction. More details about the situation on the front line are coming up next. In
the night of January 7th, units of Ukraine's defense forces struck the Oskolneftezna oil depot in Russia's Belgorod region. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the oil depot is used to supply fuel to the Russian occupying army. As a result of the strikes on the storage tanks, a large-scale fire broke out at the facility. Also, in order to disrupt the enemy's logistics, a supply warehouse belonging to the 20th Motorized Rifle Division of the occupiers was hit in the temporarily occupied territory of Donetsk region. The extent of the damage in both cases is being clarified. Agents of the Atesh movement carried out a successful sabotage operation, destroying a communications tower in Kursk. The target was a key communications hub that was actively used by Russian security forces and numerous military personnel stationed in the city. The destruction of the tower disrupted communication between key military units and command centers in the border region, making it more difficult for the occupying Russian forces to coordinate their actions. Since the beginning of the year, the Russian occupiers have significantly stepped up their efforts and are trying to accumulate resources. In the Serebryansky forest of the Luhansk region, according to the 81st Airmobile Brigade of the Air Assault Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Ukrainian soldiers are doing everything they can to thwart the enemy's plans. Drone operators from the Apache Unmanned Systems Battalion are deliberately destroying Russian logistics, targeting concentrations of vehicles and personnel of the Russian army. Just in the past 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 2 occupiers, destroyed 2 buggies, an ATV, 4 motorcycles, and 5 enemy shelters.
It should be noted that the entire Donetsk region is one of the enemy's priority directions for offensive operations. But we see that even after our troops withdrew to safer positions in the Siversk area, Ukrainian forces are still able to hold the defense, using elevated positions and geographical features to restrain the enemy. The same applies to the Serebryansky forest in the sense that, in actual fact, Russia is currently employing a very significant amount of its available aviation assets, conducting extensive airstrikes with precision-guided bombs in order to achieve certain specific and strategic effects, primarily attempting to completely destroy our defensive positions and thereby ensure their continued advance on the ground. But overall, I can note that for us, the key and most important thing in our strategic defensive operation remains minimizing the enemy's rate of advance and inflicting as many losses as possible. These goals are being achieved. Hence the analysis from our international partners, who refer to data from their intelligence services, for example, the American one, stating that at this pace, even if Russia were to succeed, they would need 20 to 30 months to capture Donetsk region. But that says a lot. It speaks to the resilience of the Ukrainian defense.
In the Konstantinovka direction, the enemy carried out assault operations in the areas of the settlements of Yablonovka, Rusin, Yar, and towards Sofiivka. In the newly hottest Pokrovsk direction, Russian invaders attempted to push back Ukrainian defenders from their positions in the areas of the settlements of Shakova, Fedorovka, Rodinske, Mirnorad, Udakhne and Molodetske. And in the Huliaipole direction, combat clashes took place in the areas of the settlements of Dobropilya, Varvarivka, Zelene and Huliaipole.
As the head of Ukrainian military intelligence, now head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov previously warned one of the priorities for Russian forces would be to conduct offensive operations specifically in the Zaporizhzhia direction, and that is exactly what we are seeing happening now. At the moment, we have managed to relatively stabilize and contain the situation. The advance, including by units of the Territorial Defense Forces and the Armed Forces, which are holding the defensive lines, has been quite effective, and in this sector, other units of the Defense and Security Forces are managing to hold back the enemy's onslaught and have effectively stabilized the situation. But we understand that the Pokrovsk direction and the Huliaipole direction, as well as overall attempts to advance in the Zaporizhzhia region, will be among the priorities for the enemy in the coming weeks and months on the front line. Therefore, corresponding defensive actions are being taken, including the deployment of additional units and reserves in order to, based on assessments of the enemy's actions, increase the effectiveness of our defensive line, including in the Zaporizhzhia direction. In
December, the unmanned systems units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces neutralized more than 33,000 Russian soldiers. That's about as many as Russia drafts in a month, and that's only according to confirmed video evidence. In 1 month, Ukrainian unmanned aerial systems carried out about 339,000 missions and ground robotic systems nearly 2,100. At the same time, the number of targets hit increased by 31%. We are fully aware of what we will have to face in the near future and exactly what needs to be done to neutralize the enemy on the battlefield of unmanned systems. In modern warfare, this is the top priority. To this end, among other things, I have set the task of forming a special unit designed to effectively detect and destroy the enemy's high-tech drone units, command posts and crews of the occupiers' unmanned aerial systems. Those who have an advantage in the quantity and quality of unmanned systems save more of their warriors and destroy the enemy more effectively. And we continue to hold the advantage in the number of applications. FPV drones. Alexander Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Telegram. Over the past 24 hours, Ukrainian Defense Forces have eliminated another 1,040 Russian occupiers. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion have exceeded 1,214,000 personnel. In addition, the valiant Ukrainian defenders successfully destroyed 3 enemy tanks, 2 armored combat vehicles, a significant 26 artillery pieces, and 2 powerful MLRS during intense engagements the day before. They also effectively disabled 123 pieces of other crucial military equipment.
Numerous units of Russian military vehicles and specialized equipment. Furthermore, there is strong and unwavering support for Ukraine's comprehensive European integration process, particularly emphasized during Cyprus's significant and influential presidency of the European Union Council and the crucial prompt opening of all necessary negotiation clusters. Volodymyr Zelenskyy emphasized that Ukraine is counting on strong decisions and real progress during these 6 months. In addition, the discussion covered defense support for Ukraine and Cyprus's participation in the Pearl and SAVE programs.
At the same time as Cyprus assumed the presidency, peace negotiations reached a new level of intensity. We are working very actively with our European partners, and, of course, with the United States and all members of our coalition, from Canada to Japan, from the EU to Australia. Perhaps, and we sincerely hope so, this war will end during your presidency, and of course only if sufficient pressure is exerted on the aggressor. We all understand how wars like this end: Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine, our people, our children. And when the pressure becomes strong enough to exhaust the source of aggression, peace comes. We provide Ukraine, which is defending its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, with our unwavering political, economic, and humanitarian support. This policy, as I have repeatedly stated, will be continued and strengthened during our presidency. After all, we, the people of Cyprus, know firsthand what invasion and occupation mean, what it is to be refugees, to have missing persons, and to experience violations of fundamental human rights.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy also met with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa. The parties discussed in particular the continuation of work on the reparations loan. For Ukraine, this includes defense assistance from EU member states, as well as strengthening air defense and combat aviation.
We can clearly see this in the key priority of your presidency, building a safer and more independent Europe. This responsibility begins in Ukraine because Ukraine's security is Europe's security. Together, we will work towards achieving a just and lasting peace. And yesterday's meeting in Paris was a very important step in that direction. We will continue to advance Ukraine and Moldova on their path toward our European Union. After all, a free and prosperous Ukraine, as well as a united and prosperous Moldova, must be part of the EU.
Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, also held a meeting with his Cypriot counterpart. The parties discussed support for Ukraine's accession to the European Union. The head of Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasized the importance of opening negotiation clusters this year. He stressed that Cyprus's role in this process is extremely important. The ministers discussed bilateral cooperation between the countries, particularly in the field of security, as well as the use of EU instruments for defense, sanctions, and the reconstruction of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian delegation continued peace talks in Paris. As the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov, noted, not all information can be made public, but there are already concrete results. Today, the third session of negotiations in 2 days was held with representatives of the President of the United States. Among other things, the most difficult issues were discussed, namely the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and territories.
They discussed in detail the key elements of the basic framework for ending the war. Special attention was given to possible formats for further contacts at the leadership level involving Ukraine, European partners, and the United States. At the end of the day, we are preparing a detailed report for the President of Ukraine. Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram. At the same time,
the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, stated that the issues regarding foreign deterrence forces in Ukraine are almost agreed upon. However, he is not yet ready to disclose the details. Specifically, this concerns the size of the contingent, its locations within Ukraine, as well as an action plan in the event of renewed Russian aggression. Romania has also expressed its readiness to strengthen security in the Black Sea. The country's president, Nicușor Dan, noted that peace negotiations have entered a critical phase, and therefore Ukraine must receive reliable guarantees that will prevent a recurrence of war. Bucharest's support for Ukraine is not only military but also institutional. For example, an honorary consulate of Romania has opened in Lviv. It will serve as a platform for economic cooperation, investment, and humanitarian initiatives, as well as a symbol of political support for Ukraine's security and its Euro-Atlantic course. At the same time, European partners are reaffirming their readiness to make a practical contribution to Ukraine's security. The Czech Republic will continue to coordinate the Czech initiative for supplying Ukraine with large-caliber ammunition, utilizing its own technologies and expertise while other countries provide funding.
I still have a meeting ahead with the National Security Council, where I will learn more detailed information about the ammunition initiative. But after all the negotiations I have already conducted and in agreement with coalition partners, I have decided that we will not cancel the ammunition initiative. The project will continue and the Czech Republic will act as the coordinator. No money from Czech citizens will be invested in the ammunition initiative. Andrej Babiš, Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, on social network X.
The international dialogue on ending Russia's war against Ukraine has reached a critical point where the foundation for long-term peace and the format of relations in Europe are being shaped. This is the conviction of Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. According to him, the negotiation process is now focused precisely on fundamental issues. And despite the continuation of hostilities, the parties are increasingly moving towards discussing specific conditions, without which achieving sustainable peace is impossible. Ukraine today is the main guarantor of Europe's security, as its army has real experience in modern warfare. The head of the Center for Countering Disinformation stated this at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Andrei Kovalenko. According to him, in light of recent global events, European military autonomy is becoming particularly relevant.
The split of the European Union is of interest to many. At the same time, maintaining the unity of Europe and the United States and Ukraine's inclusion in the EU can prevent this. Correct European actions towards Ukraine can guarantee stability for the European Union even in times of turbulence. Andrei Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The documents on security guarantees for Ukraine are ready. The signing will take place in the near future, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced following the meeting of the coalition of willing countries in Paris. Representatives from 35 countries participated, including 27 heads of state. Indeed, it was a global meeting with a very high level of discussion, noted the President of Ukraine. The main outcome of the summit, according to the head of state, was two key documents. These are the joint declaration of all coalition countries and the trilateral declaration of France, the United Kingdom, and Ukraine. Yulia Granovskaya will provide more details.
Ukraine, France, and the United Kingdom have reached an agreement on the deployment of multinational forces in the country after the end of the war. The declaration was signed by Presidents Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Emmanuel Macron, as well as Prime Minister Keir Starmer. All the details have been worked out regarding the deployment and composition of the forces, as well as the specific types and quantities of weapons, reported Volodymyr Zelenskyy. It has been determined which countries are ready to take the lead in specific areas, ensuring security on land, in the air, at sea, and providing assistance in reconstruction.
What's important is that today there are comprehensive documents, coalitions, and willing participants. This is not just talk, but concrete action. There is a joint declaration from all coalition countries and a trilateral declaration from France, Britain, and Ukraine. These documents exist, and this is a signal of how seriously Europe and the entire coalition are prepared to work for real security.
The President of France confirmed that Kyiv's partners will provide support to the armed forces of Ukraine after the war ends, and the United States will take on the monitoring of the ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia.
So, today we are presenting various levels of security guarantees in which the United States of America has confirmed its participation, and in particular in what we call monitoring, that is, observing the front line.
The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, emphasized that it is important that we started the year in this way. European and American allies stand shoulder to shoulder with President Zelenskyy, defending peace.
I can say that after the ceasefire, the United Kingdom and France will establish military bases throughout Ukraine, build protective facilities for weapons and military equipment to ensure Ukraine's defense capability. Together with our coalition partners, we have also agreed on significant further steps.
Ukraine's partners have reaffirmed their commitments to provide military assistance to Kyiv as well as to support Ukraine in the event of another Russian attack. This includes the use of military capabilities, intelligence and logistical support, diplomatic initiatives, as well as additional sanctions against the aggressor country. The coalition of the willing is ready to provide both political and legal guarantees for Ukraine, which will take effect immediately after a ceasefire, said European Council President Antonio Costa.
The EU will contribute to efforts to provide the security guarantees Ukraine needs for any long-term peace agreement. Support for Ukraine's progress on its path toward EU membership, which is a key element of its future prosperity. Assistance in covering Ukraine's financial needs for the next 2 years through a €90 billion loan agreed upon by the European Council in December of last year. Part of these funds will be allocated to support the armed forces of Ukraine, the first line of defense against aggression. We will provide assistance in carrying out our EU civil and military missions on the ground. Ukraine must be in the strongest possible position before, during, and after any ceasefire. Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, on the social network X.
It is fundamentally important that all countries, coalitions, willing parties and the United States join in providing security guarantees for Ukraine, noted the Prime Minister of Poland. Our task is to ensure transatlantic solidarity in putting pressure on Russia, stated Donald Tusk.
Europe wants this. And today, the United States at least declares that they also want to cooperate toward real security guarantees for Ukraine. And by real, we mean both the ability to deter Russia from potentially resuming aggression as well as a joint response if such an attack occurs. I mean, after a peace agreement is reached, so of course we're talking about plans to provide security guarantees in the air, at sea and on land.
Significant progress has been made in several critically important areas of work, including the bilateral security guarantee system and the Prosperity Plan, stated U.S. Special Representative Steve Witkoff. He reported that consultations between the American and Ukrainian delegations will continue on January 7th.
2 tankers from Russia's so-called Shadow Fleet were seized by the U.S. Armed Forces. The Coast Guard boarded both vessels. The first one was in the North Atlantic. The tanker Bella 1, after a 2-week chase across the ocean, changed its name to Marinera and raised the Russian flag. The Russian Federation even sent ships and a submarine from its navy into the Atlantic to protect it. However, this had no effect. The Russian Ministry of Transport has already confirmed that American military personnel boarded the tanker, and the White House announced that the sailors captured from the Marinera would be handed over to the U.S. judicial authorities. Also, just a few hours later in the Caribbean Sea, American forces boarded and took control of another vessel from the Russian Federation's sanctioned Shadow Fleet, the tanker Sofia. At least 36 people have died during large-scale protests in Iran. The anti-government demonstrations, which have been ongoing for a week and a half, have spread to more than 50 localities across the country, including regions that were previously considered loyal to the Iranian leadership. Protesters claim that they managed to take control of 2 cities, driving out the regime's security forces. Ayatollah. Some of them have switched sides to join the protesters, according to Al Jazeera. At the same time, the number of casualties and unrest continues to rise due to the authorities' extremely harsh actions. The wave of protests in Iran erupted at the end of December because of the state of the economy. In particular, the exchange rate of the Iranian rial fell to a historic low of $1.5 million to $1. On December 28th, merchants stopped working, and then mass riots began. With that, I conclude this edition of the program, Our Time, but I promise to return at 10:30 p.m. with a brief summary of today's events.